Hey, this is Dr. Berry. Let's talk for a few minutes about the question, does low carb diets, do they lead to early death? There's an article that's been touted in mainstream media lately that was published by a group of researchers, and I want to talk about that, and I want to break this article down. Not only, and we're going to talk about the media, we're going to talk about the scientific journal community. We're going to talk about lots of stuff in this video. So stay with me to the end if you'd like to hear a little rant about the researchers in this study and what they got wrong and what you need to take away from this to maximize your personal health. Okay. Now, if you know somebody who's read this study in some of the major media outlets and is freaked out by it and is afraid to do low carb because of this, please share this on your Facebook page. Share this with them. Send them an email of the link. Help me to help people understand that the low carb, healthy fat, ketogenic way of eating is the way that human beings are supposed to eat and optimize their health. Now, let's talk about this. Let's break this down. So the actual article that everybody is freaking out about was published in the Lancet Journal of Public Health, which is a British journal. It's a very prestigious journal. Usually if something's published there, definitely mainstream media, and most people just take it on blind faith that that's the truth. There's no need to even read the study, just read the conclusion, and then you've got the facts that you need to live your human life. And I'm going to let you know some facts about this study and about the Lancet and all medical journals and about mainstream media that's going to help you kind of filter through all this stuff and figure out what you need to take away from it. So this study was done by a group of Harvard researchers. And again, there you go. There's the wreath of knowledge or the wreath of truth that people from Harvard evidently wear when it comes to the mainstream media's opinion of them. And so this is actually an ongoing study that was started in 1987. And I'm going to put links to everything down below. I want you to download this. I want you to make time to download these links. I want you to read this entire article and then focus on what I've said, but also read mainstream news articles about this. And I want you to think about, did they accurately represent what is in this study? Did a single mainstream media outlet critically review this? Did they have a science editor to look at this? Was this study done well? Is this a well-done study? Should we even publish a piece about this? I think that's the question that should have been asked. So this is based on the ARIC study that was started in 1987, and on the original design of the study, it could have been a very, very good study to help us understand how your diet influences your health. But unfortunately, it was done with bias and many other things that we'll talk about later. But I've got links down below, and I want you to download all of this and read all of this. Make time. I promise it's that important for your health to know this stuff. And I don't want you to blindly believe anything I say ever. I want you to verify, okay? And so that's something that none of the mainstream media said in their articles, is that they want you to download it and read it and verify it. It seems like they just wanted you to believe them blindly. So started in 1987, and it had about 15,000 participants. And you know from previous videos of mine, that's good. You want a lot of participants in a study. The study participants were anywhere from 45 to 64 years of age. That's a good idea for a study, right? And so let's first talk about the definitions that they use. Any good journal article or legal brief or law that's passed by a country or a state should include at the top a list of definitions. How do you define certain words? And here's why that would have been important for this. They break up they arbitrarily break up the study participants into three different groups: low carb, moderate carb, and high carb. But their definition of low carb and my definition of low carb are two completely different things. And I suspect you also have a different definition of low carb. They considered anyone who was eating 39% of their energy from carbohydrates to be low carb. Now, anyone in the ketogenic or the low carb healthy fat community knows that 39% is not even close to low carb. That's not even in the neighborhood of low carb. That's high carb. Okay. So basically, what they broke up was high carb, higher carb, and highest carb, and then they wanted to talk about that. And if you break it up that way, then I actually agree with what they found. And so the definition of high carb and low carb, they obviously have different definitions, but this is not something that was discussed in the mainstream media. They also, another huge error was they failed completely to talk about energy quality, energy source quality. So for carbohydrates, they would count a Twinkie as exactly the same quality of food as raw broccoli because they're both carbohydrate foods. Therefore, they're just lumped into carbohydrates, and that makes no sense whatsoever. They also make no differentiation between healthy fats like butter and avocado oil and olive oil and MCT oil and canola, safflower, shortening margarine. They don't make any differentiation at all between these different qualities of fat. They also don't talk about the quality of the protein that the participants were eating at all. Okay. And so another thing is a huge problem with this ongoing study is that it is a questionnaire driven prospective observational study. And now this is probably the weakest of all study designs on the planet. I can't even imagine a weaker way that you could glean supposed meaningful research data from a prospective observational trial from which you use a questionnaire to get the data. Okay, so this study's still ongoing. It's been going for 25 years. And they included, and other problems with the methodology is that they included people who reported, self-reported. It's all self-reported data, right? But some people have evidently, from the way the methods are described, have been eating 600 calories or 600 kilocalories of food a day for 25 years. Now, anybody out there who knows anything about human nutrition knows that those people would be dead. You can't eat 600 kilocalories of energy a day for 25 years and still be a healthy, happy, living adult human. That's just not possible. And so, but they included that data, just like that was just as meaningful as people eating 1,200 calories and 2,500 calories a day. That was included in the study, and anybody who reported under 600 calories, well, they excluded that. But I think probably no human in the U.S. eats 600 calories a day for years and years at a time, but yet that's included in the study as meaningful data. Okay. They also, on the questionnaire, now this questionnaire was designed by a fellow by the name of Dr. Willett. And if you're an influencer in the ketogenic way of eating, or you study this stuff much, you've heard Dr. Willett's name before. He was good friends with a guy named Ansel Keys. And so he actually designed the questionnaire that they used for this study. And so also, again, you're like, well, wait a minute. So what about bias in this study? Yeah, bias is a huge thing. First of all, recall bias, because the people, they filled out this questionnaire for the very first time in 1987, right? And then they didn't fill it out again until sometime in the 90s. And so, and they've only filled out two of these questionnaires that we know of. And so it's not actually mentioned in the study whether they had filled out other questionnaires which just were excluded from the study, or if they've only literally asked these people two times over the last 25 years, what have you eaten in the last few years? Okay, and so you can imagine if you were handed a questionnaire and it had questions like, how many cups of ribs have you eaten in the last 3 years? First of all, how do you measure ribs in cups? Secondly, do you remember what you ate last week? Because I don't. And I suspect most of the participants in the study had no idea either. They were guesstimating. And so all of this data is guesstimation. And then when you add in the bias of the researchers, right? So there's a number of researchers whose names are listed as authors on this study. One of them is Dr. Willett. And as you learn more about the fight between high carb and low carb, you'll realize that that's very important, because researcher bias in epidemiological studies like this study is huge. It can destroy any meaningful data that might be in the study. Okay, and so here's another huge error in the way that this study was done. So when they started to do the second questionnaire, they excluded everyone from the study who had developed diabetes, coronary heart disease, or who had had a stroke. Now, you're like, wait a minute, what? Because those are the people that were probably eating the highest carbohydrates, because chronically high glucose and chronically high insulin are the things that lead to heart disease, stroke, and diabetes. But yet they excluded all of those people. Now, do you think that might have skewed the data in a different direction if they had been included? Why would you exclude the people who have the most serious glucose and insulin metabolic disease unless you were trying to skew the data, right? Makes no sense whatsoever. So this, like I said, the food frequency questionnaire was designed by Dr. Willett. That's the one they used. I wonder if he gets a little hit of money every time they use his questionnaire. I'm not sure about that. Somebody should find out and let me know. And so this thing, it's been literally given to the participants twice in 25 years that we know of, that was reported. It's my theory, personally. I have no evidence to back this up, but I'll bet you that the FFQ was given to these participants more often than that. But these researchers decided to only include 2 of the questionnaires because it helped their data prove what they were trying to prove. Okay. And so there's really nothing new here. Basically, they just went back into an ongoing observational study and just pulled out some data and created a research paper based on that. And so we'll talk later about how that even got published and then how it even got reported. Why is that even a thing? So there's really nothing new here. This is data that anybody could pull up out of the ARIC study that's still ongoing, and then you could cherry pick your own data out of that and prove whatever you wanted to prove with that. So the study design, the ARIC study initially was designed by a group of people who believe that total cholesterol is bad and that saturated fat is bad. And so you've got the researcher bias from the very beginning of this research study all the way up to this latest publication based on the research study. Dr. Willett, who is thankfully going to be probably retiring soon, and we'll talk about that later towards the end. So we've got, and then the graph, there's a graph that's just been thrown all over the media. The graph, all of the data on the left side of the graph, the supposed low carb side of the graph, is extrapolated wishful thinking. Okay, because first of all, who back in 1987 was eating a meaningfully low carb, healthy fat, or ketogenic diet? No one. Maybe 1 or 2 people out of the 15,000 were actually eating a true ketogenic, low carb, healthy fat diet. So you really don't have anyone in this study who we would talk about as eating the ketogenic way of eating or eating a low carb, healthy fat way of eating. They're not in this study. These are just standard sick Americans who were included in this study to start with. But I guarantee you, if somebody who's a little nerdier than me starts pulling apart the data and where they came from, where this graph came from, you're going to quickly see that the left side of this graph is made up wishful thinking on the part of people who love plant-based diets. Okay, so basically these researchers, and I feel sorry for a few of the researchers listed on this because, and I'll talk about that in a minute. I feel sorry for them because this data is all cherry picked, just like the data that Ansel Keys cherry picked out of the 22 country study that he then called the 7 country study. This is basically the same methodology that he used. That they're still using this, and it's not really surprising since Dr. Willett and Dr. Keys are good friends. So there actually is meaningful research on this kind of thing now. And I'm going to put a link to the Verta study where they're actually studying low carb, healthy fat for diabetics, who are the people who you actually want to study with this, right? You don't want to exclude them from this study. You want to include them because they're the most metabolically sick people who you could possibly study. So they're the ones who need the immediate benefits of a low carb, healthy / ketogenic diet. Okay. Now let's talk about Dr. Willett for a second. Was good buddies with Dr. Keys. He loves a plant-based diet. So his bias is all over this study. He's been the chair of the Department of Nutrition at Harvard for, 25 years. And so you can imagine this guy's ivory tower is so tall that everybody at Harvard would love to do a research study with him, right? I mean, that's how you would basically make a name for yourself is to have him included on a study that you did. And so, in the Harvard microcosm of thought, that's a very smart thing to do. But I really feel bad for the cardiology fellow whose name appears first on this study, and for the statistician whose name appears in this study as well, because I think they'll come to regret being a part of this study in the next few years to come, because more and more people are waking up and they're not just blindly believing things that come from Harvard or that are published in Lancet or that are reported in mainstream media. We all know that there's all these biases out there, and so we don't just blindly believe this crap anymore. So let's see what else. So now let's talk about the media. You know, there was a time a few years back in the US media when if you published a research study, they actually had a science editor who would actually look at this stuff critically. And he might say, well, you know, this study's poorly designed, but it seems to show these things, but there's a lot of bias in this study. And also they left out this, that, and the other. Not a single major media news article. I don't even think anybody with a degree in science even read these articles. I think they basically just said, oh, it's from Harvard and it's published in Lancet, therefore it's the gospel. We're just going to publish that, right? I think that's what happened, because there's no evidence in any of the mass media's articles where someone critically scientifically thought about this as they wrote the article that was then published for people like you and me to believe that it was the gospel. So the media, they love inflammatory stories, they love scary stories, and they realize that low carb, healthy fat, keto, that's becoming huge. That's becoming a grassroots movement. And so if they can spook you guys with a headline and you'll click on it, so clickbait basically is what they've been publishing, then they know that they can increase their advertising rate because so many people read this article, right? And so it appears to me that's exactly what happened here, because in the media articles, I probably read 10 different ones from Sydney, from London, from New York, from Chicago, from LA. None of them have a single critically, scientifically thought out thing to say about this article. It's all just fanfare, applause, and look at this, you better watch out for low carb, even though low carb wasn't studied in this study, right? And so now let's talk about the Lancet. In my opinion, there was a time 10, 20 years ago when the Lancet would not even have considered this article for publication. They would have read this and went, this is a bunch of crap. We're not publishing this. Or they would have sent it back with a list of 45 things that needed to be corrected before this article would have even been considered for publication. But in our current atmosphere of scientific rigor, if it comes from Harvard and Dr. Willett's name is on it, then it's going to get published. That's just how it is. And so that I'm very disappointed in the mainstream media, but I'm really, really disappointed in the Lancet for publishing such garbage as this. And I don't call it garbage because it disagrees with what I think. I call it garbage because of the methodology that I talked about earlier. It's embarrassing that the Lancet would publish something like this. And I hope that they'll consider retracting this, or maybe at least having a couple of editorials that talk about the deficiencies of this study as they published it. And now let's talk about Harvard, right? It's well known in the scientific community that often before a scientific paradigm can shift, all of the leaders of the current paradigm either have to retire or die. That's been known in science for over 100 years, that basically when a newcomer like Dr. Semmelweis, that I talk about in my book, Lies My Doctor Told Me, when he talks about, hey, you know, you should wash your hands before you deliver a woman's baby, he was ostracized and destroyed and ultimately died because he was right. And that's really the way it works in scientific research, and especially medical research and nutritional research. It's not going to change until the old guys who were buddies with Dr. Ansel Keys either retire or die. Dr. Willett's 73 years old, so I think there's hope for our nutritional science in the future. So, but Harvard, man, you guys got to get it together. You got to stop publishing opinion pieces and putting it out there as meaningful science, because this study is ridiculous. This study is something that a junior college science major would be able to pick apart easily. And so if you think there aren't people who are picking your studies apart and going, wow, you really can't trust anything that comes out of Harvard anymore. And then in the same vein, people are saying more and more frequently, you can't trust anything that's published in Lancet. If they'll publish this crap, what else are they publishing that's also crap? And so I really think that the powers that be at Harvard and at the Lancet really need to start thinking about this, and other nutrition universities or medical universities, and then medical and nutritional journals. You guys really need to start thinking about what you're publishing, because keto is not going away. Low carb healthy fat's not going away. It's exploding in growth. And these are all smart people. These are not dumb people. You can't just publish some bullshit article in the Sydney Herald or in the Guardian and expect everybody to just blindly believe that anymore. Those days are gone. We've got this thing called the internet now, and this thing called Google now, and this thing called PubMed.gov. We can go look it up ourselves. And more we're doing that because we don't trust you anymore, Harvard, and we don't trust you anymore, Lancet. And the JAMA and the New England Journal of Medicine, increasingly, nobody trusts you anymore. And so your brand is quickly dying. And so if you don't want that to continue out to its ultimate conclusion, you should perhaps publish some retractions and publish some opposing viewpoints when you publish propaganda like this. Okay? So in this, we've got all kinds of bias. We've got a very weak study. And on my Facebook page, I'm actually going to publish a pyramid of study strength. There are studies that are very powerful if they're done according to a certain style, and other studies like this observational self-reporting study, it's not even on the pyramid because it's such weak data that you glean from it. Okay, so we've got the big lie. If you repeat it often enough, people will believe it. Saturated fat's bad, total cholesterol's bad, eat plant-based. Then you've got the echo of the lie, where the Sydney Herald and the Guardian and the New York Times and Time Magazine, these guys all just blindly repeat this lie. And so it gets echoed all through society as truth. And then your mama starts telling you about it, and your neighbor and your hairdresser, and then we're saturated with this lie, and nobody can seem to get rid of the lie, even though it's just that, a big fat lie. So also, one more thing, and then I'll be done. I want the low carb healthy fat community and the ketogenic community to learn something from this. I don't want you guys to ever fall prey to these lies, but I also don't want you to ever tell these lies. It's very easy for us to find an observational study of self-reported data and that shows, oh, low carb healthy fat's good for you, right? And then we start pushing that all over social media. That's just as dishonest. Stop talking about observational studies from self-reported data. They're meaningless. They mean nothing. They never prove causation. They can only show association if they have a very high confidence interval. And this study doesn't, and most of them don't. And so stop even talking about observational studies. They're meaningless, okay? They're opinion pieces for scientists to read and say, see, haha, I told you, okay? Now, if you'd like to learn more about stuff like this, please consider subscribing to this YouTube channel and click the little bell right beside the subscribe button. That way, every time I get a bright idea, you'll be one of the very first to know. If you'd like to join my fight against type 2 diabetes, prediabetes, insulin resistance, obesity, childhood diabetes, and bullshit medical research like this, please click on the Patreon link down below. It's a quick sign up, and you can throw a buck or two my way so that I'll have more time to make more videos just like this. This is Dr. Berry. I'll see you next time.